Lights. Action.
I love Broadway, of course. I don't love Broadway, nobody else will.
What is your name and profession?
My name is Claire Arnold and I no longer have a job. I used to be a ticket saleswoman and I was laid off because Broadway is suffering due to the Depression.
How has Broadway impacted your life?
Well, Broadway has been part of my life since I was a little girl and I went to the theater with my parents almost every week. I'm not the most talented actress, so the stage wasn't really for me, so I was a ticket saleswoman. But now I'm not even that because so many theaters have been closed due to the Depression.
Do you know a lot about Broadway?
I do. I've done a lot of research because it's very interesting to me, and I also have heard a lot from being around the theater my whole life, and everyone talks when I'm at work.
Can you give us a little background on Broadway and how it's changed in the past decade?
In the 1920s, for the first time, blacks started performing for white audiences. They also were leads, and there was completely black cast for white audiences. In New York, there had always been black theater parallel to white theater, but the majority of times there was no white audiences for black actors. The 1920s brought black actors to Broadway. Before the 1920s, the majority of the themes of shows was about co-ed and what they call slamming doors. But now, the themes of shows have changed a lot, and it's now about dysfunctional marriages and racism and interrace relationships. It's much more interesting for people because they can relate to these aspects better.
Why exactly were you laid off from your job?
Well, Broadway has suffered a great deal since the stock market crash. From producers to ushers, so many people have been laid off and lost their jobs and are suffering tremendously now. From 1929 to 1930, there was a total of 233 productions made. From 1930 to 1931, this number dropped to 187. The trend continued to decrease until 1939, when there was a total of 98 shows being produced. This was the smallest number of productions since the turn of the century. The only exception to this trend decreasing was the 1931 to 1932 year, where the number of shows did increase, a very small amount.
How have you coped with the loss of your job?
Well, it's been extremely hard for me because I went from a middle-class woman to a lower class, and I have nothing now. I'm struggling to make ends meet. I had to move from a nicer part of town, downtown, to a more run-down area.
Is there anyone helping you through these tough times?
Rachel Crothers, a playwright, proposed to FDR when she went to the White House a system called the TheaterWorks Project. This helps thousands of theater people who've been laid off, from producers all the way to salespeople like me.
What exactly is the TheaterWorks Project?
The TheaterWorks Project is a project to help laid off theater people. They have developed chapters in every city. New York, having the most theater people, also has the most laid off. Therefore, there are 6 chapters, including one in Harlem.
Have you helped in any way with TheaterWorks projects?
Yeah, before I was laid off, I volunteered at the Lafayette Theater chapter, which is the chapter in Harlem. It is primarily black, and I helped with one of their most famous productions, which was an all-black cast in Macbeth. It was set in Haiti. It was very successful, and a lot of those actors went on to be on Broadway at later dates. Some of them are probably laid off now.
Thank you so much for your time. You've helped so much with everything. I hope you find a new job soon.
I love Broadway.
How much?
How much do I love Broadway? I think the entertainment value and the ambiance of the old theaters are just phenomenal. Especially when you go to one of the theaters that have been there for 100 years, and the seats and the beautiful decor and the Art Deco. That just adds to the show.
Oh my gosh, it's Andrew Higgins! What show are you working on now?
Are you?
I'm from Fox News.
Currently right now I'm working on the Showboat.
Oh wow, can we get an exclusive?
How long is this gonna take?
Probably about 15, 20 minutes, however long you want to give us, Mr. Higgins.
Ooh, I'm kind of busy right now. I mean, if you want to come back with me to my apartment, then I'm sure we can finish it there.
Alright. Alright, sounds good. Let's go. What is your name and profession?
My name is Andrew Higgins. I am 33 years old, and I've been in the Broadway and theater business for 16 years now. From the Great White Way in the 20s to the Depression in the 30s, you never know if you're going to have a job or not. Luckily for me, I've been in the theater business for a while, so I've managed to maintain my job. One other big change that's happening in Broadway is colored people being allowed to perform on stage now, and being allowed to be in the choruses and actual actors. There's actually a colored boy in the chorus of my play now, and his name is Joseph.
Whenever you're ready. I love Broadway.
How has your opinion on blacks changed since they have come to be on Broadway?
Well, before this, I really hadn't talked to a black person ever before in my life. I just kind of stayed out of their way and hoped that they would stay out of mine, but in this case I really couldn't because he was in my production. But even though there's like a lot of stereotypes in Broadway about blacks and many stereotypical things about them, I kind of just tried to ignore that, because when it gets down to it, they're just people just trying to live life. I ended up befriending Joseph. Joseph feels very strongly about blacks in theater and Broadway productions today because a long time ago, the first black theater productions were actually done on plantations by slaves. And in a sense, he feels like he's redeeming his grandparents and all the other slaves that performed in like a theater on a plantation, because now he performs and he's... I learned about early black theater productions and how in cases like Joseph, some of them even made it to the big leagues on Broadway. Joseph also described to me about how a long time ago blacks weren't even allowed to be on stage, but instead they would have white people with black makeup on their face to appear like black people, but they were really white people. Also, the first ever black theater was the African Grove Theater, and it opened up completely separate from the white theater because back in the time of segregation it was all black theater, all white theater.
How has your audience reacted to Joseph being in your show?
Well, you know, it's funny you ask me that, because Joseph recently told me a story about a director that actually casted a black person as his main character. And he was so fearful that there was going to be riots, that people were going to freak out about it. But in actuality, the people cheered for an encore because the guy was just absolutely phenomenal. You're always going to have those racist people that are just going to be against it. But in actuality, people really just don't care anymore. Like, it's not a big deal.
I love Broadway.
Has Joseph told you about any other productions he has appeared in?
He told me that he spent a lot of time in the Lafayette Theater and starred in their most famous production, Macbeth, which had an all-black cast, and the scene was set in Haiti.
Did Joseph ever explain to you how theater became so prominent amongst blacks?
Well, after World War I, all the blacks looking in search of a better life that were down south moved up north to areas of Philadelphia and the New York region. The most prominent place that they moved to was Harlem, and because Harlem had the biggest black community of its time in the north, it started the Harlem Renaissance, which gave reason for people to get more curious in the arts and theater, and that's how blacks got involved in theater.
How did some blacks manage to keep their jobs during the rough time of the Depression?
Well, thanks to FDR and the Federal Theater Fund, they created theaters called Negro theaters, which were theaters for black people, that opened in 23 different cities all over the U.S. By doing this, it helped give jobs to actors and playwrights that were all blacks. These productions that they made helped to boost the unstable economy when people went to see them.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Higgins. I hope your show does really well.
We love Broadway!